Have you ever felt deeply dissatisfied with your life, where you didn't really know what to value and what to aim for? Where it feels like everything society is telling you to value, you don't really care about, and it's not really giving you lasting happiness and satisfaction? In this video, I'm going to tell you the story of how I went from being a very dissatisfied teenager to actually finding inspiring mentors and practices that really helped me cultivate authentic well-being in most dimensions of my life. Hey everyone, this is Timo here. Welcome back to Integral Wellbeing. So for most of my childhood, I was a pretty odd kid. I basically didn't care very much about the things that my friends and my teachers wanted me to care about. I didn't want to become rich. I didn't want to become famous. I didn't want to have just lots of hedonic pleasures in my life. I felt like there was more to life to be lived, and I wanted something more meaningful. And for the most part, my modern Western culture wasn't providing me with the kind of meaning that I was looking for. But everything kind of changed for me when I was about 16 years old, and I met my first spiritual teacher, who was Peter Fenner. Peter Fenner was a professor of philosophy from Australia who had also spent 14 years as a Tibetan Buddhist monk. Now, how often do you meet people like that, right? So he was giving a meditation weekend. During this meditation weekend, my eyes were opened to the possibilities of our own mind. I mean, essentially, Peter Fenner is a teacher of non-duality, sort of more modern style of non-dual teachings, where he combined meditation practices from lots of different traditions, specifically from Buddhism, from Zen and Tibetan Buddhism, and also from Advaita Vedanta, from Hinduism and Taoism and so on. He combined these things together to introduce people to a state of consciousness in which suffering and dissatisfaction were essentially absent from our experience, and where you could really tap into a sense of complete fulfillment, where it felt like nothing else was needed. Nothing could be added to our experience to make it even better. And I just never in my life experienced that state of consciousness before. What was remarkable was that he was able to introduce this state of consciousness without changing any of our external circumstances. Nothing was changing in terms of the inputs coming into our senses. There was no pleasure really happening, and yet we were deeply satisfied. And so this was really a life-changing experience for me, and it sort of opened the door to, okay, there's really a lot of wisdom here in our ancient philosophical and spiritual traditions about how to cultivate well-being, and that there actually is a kind of ultimate well-being. That the reason we do anything is in the end to achieve a state where nothing can be further improved, where we are totally complete and fulfilled in this moment. And he showed that that is really possible for us and that we can cultivate that. It's not just something that happens to you. I then went to university. In university, of course, I had to decide what to study, and I didn't care about most of the study areas that were available to me, because they were so oriented towards ordinary, transitory, worldly pleasures. I discovered that actually at the University of Amsterdam, they had just started a program in Buddhist philosophy. You could actually study Buddhism at university. How cool is that? So I decided to go and basically immerse myself for the next 5 years or so in the study of the world's spiritual and contemplative traditions. Specifically, I was interested in meditation and yoga and things like that. Practices that actually change your state of consciousness. Psychotechnologies. And that was a very meaningful experience, but for the most part, university was a very dry intellectual climate. We were studying these things from the outside with an objective academic lens. And a lot of times it was just kind of boring, and the things that people were studying and discovering didn't really matter that much to the average person. They wouldn't really value the kind of insights that these academics were coming up with. That was such a shame to me, because ultimately the value of these traditions is that if you put these practices into your life, they really increase your well-being and decrease your suffering. And yet, here we were in this ivory tower, studying dusty old books, writing papers that no one was going to read. What is the point of this? And so luckily, while I was in university, I kept studying with different Buddhist teachers who were very often also psychotherapists. So my second main teacher was Rob Priest. Rob Priest was an amazing person because he had spent about 5.5 years of his life in full-time solitary meditation retreat in India under the guidance of seasoned Tibetan yogis. To give you an example, one of his main teachers, his retreat teacher, called Genjampa Wangdu, not a very famous teacher, spent about 20 years or so in solitary retreat practicing and cultivating his mind to the point where his own teachers regarded him as one of the most accomplished yogis of his era. And so here he was, having done 5.5 years of intensive meditation retreat, practicing some of the most esoteric and profound methods of meditation and yoga available in the world, and yet he also discovered that actually some of the emotional struggles that he had been having since he was a younger person had not actually been addressed by the kind of retreat that he had been doing. And so he realized actually these Tibetan Buddhist practices are not necessarily designed to help us deal with the kind of psychological stuff that Westerners often struggle with. And so when he came back to the West, he decided to train as a psychotherapist, specifically in the tradition of Carl Jung in transpersonal psychology. And so for the next 12 or 13 years by now, I've been studying with him very closely and learning his incredible blend of Tibetan Buddhism and Western psychology. And that was just illuminating that we need to be combining the wisdom of East and West, of modern and ancient, in our time, because all these traditions have useful insights when it comes to the nature of well-being and how to effectively cultivate it. Now, besides spirituality and psychotherapy, which mostly deal with the human mind, I also realized that the human body is almost just as important for our well-being. It was clearly the case that if we do not take good care of our nutrition, of our sleep, of our exercise, of our breathing, that we would always be suffering even if we were great meditators and we did lots of therapy. And it struck me as amazing that in high school and elementary school, I never learned once anything truly useful about these basic functions of the human body. We all need to eat. What is healthy food? How do you prepare healthy food? How do you make sure you get all of your essential nutrients? How do I take care of my sleep? I was a horrible sleeper as a kid. I had bad insomnia for years. How is it possible that we can go to school for so many years and never learn this stuff? Same with exercise. Years later, I discovered the incredible benefits of exercise for longevity, that you can extend your lifespan by up to 10 years if you do these basic lifestyle behaviors really well. And you can actually reduce your risk of chronic disease by more than any pharmaceutical or drug or surgery ever can. That's amazing, and I never learned that anywhere. And so I realized that we need the physical aspect, we need the psychological, we need the spiritual, and of course, as I soon discovered, we also need the social dimension of well-being. Unfortunately, at this time, I started living in a cabin in the woods by myself because I wanted to be a yogi, even though I wasn't a good meditator, and so I was there alone in the woods, for the most part spending time alone, and there I was getting loneliness for the first time in my life. Up until then, I thought I didn't know what loneliness was, but there it suddenly hit me like a big wave. I was too far away from my friends, I was too far away from my family, and the barrier to going to meet somebody was quite big because it was so isolated. Actually, for some years, I had been letting my friendships slowly peter out, and I wasn't nourishing and sustaining them as I should have been, which usually happens naturally because you're in school, you're at work, you're physically around people all the time, and so it just happens by itself. But because I was living so remotely, I had to do it on my own. I had to actually put in the effort to make appointments and to regularly see people. And I didn't do that very well. So, long story short, I developed a bit of an anxiety problem and bad insomnia. So when the anxiety problem and the insomnia started spinning out of control, I realized I had to seek some help. So I sought out a psychotherapist who basically started taking an inventory of my life and seeing, okay, what are some of the basic needs that all human beings have and how are you meeting those? And it was very clear to both of us quickly that my relationships were not where they should be. And I was not getting enough direct contact with people that I love and trust and feel safe around. And so over the course of this therapy, I decided to reignite a lot of older friendships and really seek out more people and actually put myself in socially uncomfortable situations on purpose as a kind of exposure therapy to, deal with my anxiety. Luckily, all of this worked, and I actually learned some really valuable lessons about how important social relationships are to our well-being. Now, to be fair, one of the causes of my anxiety in the cabin was actually the fact that I was studying some of the big problems in the world. I was studying existential risks. By this time, I had gotten involved in the effective altruism movement, which tries to address some of the world's most pressing problems that are really large in scale, very neglected, and yet also tractable. You can make a lot of progress with relatively little effort. And of course, a lot of those problems are things that could actually wipe out the human species in the next 50 to 100 years. Some of these existential risks include things like nuclear war, great power conflict, biological weapons, AI gone rogue. And as I was studying these things day in, day out, partly for my work because I was writing articles about them, I started realizing, my goodness, many of these problems, if you put them in a list, are actually symptoms of a kind of deeper underlying problem. There was something wrong with our civilization. There was something wrong with the way our societies were functioning as a whole, and that many of the economic, political, military, social, intellectual problems were basically symptoms of this civilizational dysfunction. And so this is when I encountered the work of Daniel Schmachtenberger and people like Zach Stein, who were talking about the meta-crisis. So as the years progressed, slowly the puzzle was coming together. What I wanted to work on with my life was integral well-being, how the physical, psychological, spiritual, social, and also systemic, civilizational issues were all inter-affecting each other, and how one could effectively cultivate well-being in all these different domains of one's existence. As I'm sure you've noticed, when you go online, the information about well-being and how to cultivate it is deeply fragmented and scattered all over the place. It's a cacophony, and it's very hard to find a place that is trustworthy, that relies on good evidence, that sort of puts it all back together again, that puts the puzzle together so you can implement it in your own life. And not just to give you the information and the knowledge, but to actually help you make sustainable changes in your behavior, in your habits, so that your daily behaviors are actually going to keep contributing to your well-being and decreasing your suffering as you progress in life. So basically, this channel, Integral Wellbeing, is meant to be a one-stop shop for anything related to well-being and how to effectively cultivate it in all dimensions of your existence. I'm currently also in the process of creating online courses where you will be guided step by step through the process of changing your own behaviors and habits in the most effective way to generate long-term sustainable well-being for yourself and others. If you would like to be notified when these come out, please leave your email in the form below in the description, and we will notify you the moment they come out. If you like this video, please give a thumbs up, comment, subscribe, and share, and stay tuned for the next video, where we're going to be diving into the mechanics of healthy breathing and how inefficient breathing could be really harming your health.